Okay, do we have a cowboy hat? Do we have a gong? Do we have a percussion instrument?
We're never going to get this episode started.
And there's the tag.
Church in space.
Welcome, everybody, to Church in Space.
In 3D.
Oh, my God.
This is what happens when you have an 11 o'clock start time,
I
not
know.
a 1 o'clock.
We've thrown off the basic order of the universe. Inject ADD meds straight into everybody's bloodstream today. All right, welcome. I am Pastor Dave.
I am the recovering heretic, Dan.
All right.
And I'm Drew.
Drew, and this is RELC's podcast. Today's episode, if we ever get there, is ethical dilemmas in science fiction. So I was thinking about this because I started watching Andromeda because it's free on YouTube, all 5 seasons.
Andromeda being Gene Roddenberry's posthumous series.
Yeah, right. And it's some really good, despite its piss poor production value. But it's really good, and but there, I won't go into the episode, but there was this one episode with an actual, a real ethical dilemma involving time travel that actually made me think. Mm-hmm. And so that kind of got me thinking, actually, we should talk about ethical dilemmas in science fiction because science fiction presents a lot of ethical dilemmas, right? Kind of and since this is religion and theology and ethics are all related, and this seems like a topic right up our wheelhouse.
Well, and this is core, right? This is the very birth of sci-fi.
Right.
Frankenstein, often considered the novel that began modern sci-fi, is all about an ethical dilemma.
Right. So, all right. So we're just going to go through some ethical dilemmas. I think we should just start with what I think is the quintessential for Star Trek fandom ethical dilemma.
Yes.
Which is Tuvix.
Yes.
So there's this, if you don't know, there's this episode of Voyager where Tuvok and Neelix get merged into one character.
A transporter accident.
A transporter accident results in them getting merged into one character. Everybody's really excited about this because it means Neelix is gone. It was universally hated in both the ship and the show.
Yes.
Fandom. Sorry.
The Jar Jar Binks of Star Trek.
Right. Oh, man.
I mean, you're leaving out Crusher, but
well, but he is so bad they get rid of him. Like Neelix, they keep him on the show the whole time, right?
Shut up, Wesley.
Right. I mean, that's the thing about Crusher is he's just as bad, but they at least have the self-awareness to write him off the show after 3 seasons or whatever. They figure out a way to undo the transporter accident in the episode. So the ethical dilemma is Tuvix is his own person, right? In this episode, does Janeway undo this person to get the 2 other people back? This kind of gets the ethical dilemma of what is personhood, but it's is Janeway murdering this new being in order to return 2 people, right? Does that make sense?
Yeah.
I mean, it's either murdering 1 person or murdering 2.
Yeah, and I have always been on the Janeway, so my personal thing is Janeway gets prosecuted for murder the moment she gets back into Federation space.
Yeah. But to Drew's point, she'd be prosecuted for murder no matter what decision she makes.
See, my argument would be as a prosecutor that the first 2 people were a legitimate accident, right? There was no way accidents happen, but the accident resulted in a new living sentient being.
And there's the point right there, is that it's new life and you shouldn't kill the new life.
Right. Exactly.
And yet, then she's still guilty of negligent homicide for the other 2 because she found a way to save them but did not use it.
Right. Either way, she shouldn't be an admiral. She should be in that penal colony in New Zealand that they found. That they found Tom Barris. Side note, I love that New Zealand is a penal colony. Federation is just the British Empire returned.
Not Australia? You go with New Zealand, not Australia? Just make it Australia.
They play a lot of rugby. And she's pretty determined by it. As I remember, the episode, the doctor won't do it. Janeway actually has to do it herself because the doctor won't actually.
Well, and part of it, and again, this only deepens the ethical dilemma. She's making a very subjective decision because Tuvok is her friend.
Yeah.
And she wants her friend back.
Right.
Yeah.
And that is tainting her decision on this.
Yeah.
But
so you're saying that if it was just random 2 people, that Janeway would not have killed Tuvix. It was just 2, objectively, if it was 2, lower deck ensigns,
It's those two ensigns she's like.
So
with in that
Mariner
one
and
episode.
Boimler.
Yeah. Right. I don't think she, I do think that's part of it, right? It's her two friend, her best friend,
And she does have a soft spot for Neelix, too.
right.
Yeah.
She does. Well, obviously, because how else does he stay on the ship?
Yeah.
Not get fed to the Borg or something.
He makes good coffee. That's all that counts.
I
for
think,
her.
Yeah.
But no, I mean, that does. I do think, yes, if it was Boimler and Mariner, I think she would have let the new life come through. Part of the Federation credo, right?
Yeah.
Or Starfleet's anyway, to find new life,
Seek out new life and new
civilizations, right? And this is a new life form now that has been created,
and a hyper competent life form. That's part of it too, right? That, like he takes the best of Tuvok plus the best of Neelix and forms like a hyper competent officer / cook.
Yeah.
Right.
So you're saying because he was competent, because Janeway was friends with Tuvok, an incompetent ensign combination definitely would have made it.
Would have made it.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, it's like this is where my major criticism of Voyager is like they never actually deal with the fact that they're this lone ship and like the resource shortages that it would require, and so like from just a pure resource perspective, you're actually losing something by losing Tuvix, both hyper competent but able at intuition because he's not a pure Vulcan, right?
Yeah.
And like so you lose. It's a substantial loss to the overall governing of the crew to lose this really rare resource. Hyper competent officers,
right?
But also the resource perspective, it's one less person.
It is one less person, right? But then maybe Harry Kim gets promoted.
Okay, I think we're diverging way too much into Voyager, so I think we should move on to our next topic.
Okay.
Yeah.
Next up, well, we'll do another Voyager one. Quinn committing suicide. Right. So this is the episode where there's the Q who wants to commit suicide because he's bored.
Yeah.
Right. Because they've done everything, they've talked about everything, and he wants to do something new.
Yeah.
Something
that theoretically a Q cannot do.
Right. Or shouldn't be able to do or whatever.
No, and that is, and especially the ethical dilemma there. I think if you're talking about pure euthanasia, you can make a more ethical argument, right? Because you've got quality of life issues. Someone's in pain and agony.
Yeah.
And let's face it, in civilized society, it's much more of a debate. It happens a lot in war.
That and, assisted suicide in like hospice and in elder care.
Yeah, you can make an ethical argument for that.
Yeah.
But can you make an ethical argument for simply being tired of living?
Right. Like I'm just bored. Because in the episode, the question is over, does he have a right to do it? Like that's actually what the trial's over in the episode, as I recall. It's like, does he have a right to do it?
Well, and ultimately what they're asking is, do we have the right of overseeing our own lives? It's a broader metaphor.
It is, and like my answer to that is typically no.
And I'll have to ask why. Why don't we have? Why aren't we allowed to have the power over our own lives?
Because free will.
No, because your life never really was yours to begin with.
Now, is that an ethical argument or is that a religious argument?
Yes,
that's where the two diverge.
Well, I mean, I don't. This is me. I don't make a distinction. They are. My ethics are my theology. My theology is my ethics. But it's like if you just objectively think about it, right? Like you didn't come into this world of your own volition.
Even biologically.
Biologically, right? Like you didn't come into it of your own volition. You had no decision making in the process. And actually for most of your life, the part where you needed help to get to this point, right? Like none of it was really by your own. You didn't go to school by your own choice. You didn't, Lord knows I didn't, right? Like you didn't learn things, right? Like you didn't eat your vegetables by your own. Most of us didn't, right? Like there's all these things that actually we belong to others, right? Like that's just biologically, like the African Ubuntu concept, right? Like I am because you are.
Yeah.
That's not even getting into the theology of it. Our lives don't belong to us, like theologically speaking. Which is really hard because we always want to say in America, they do belong to us.
Yeah. That's part of what our nation's built on is that philosophy. Well, and this gets we have to explore this in more depth too, because think about the rise in suicide with tweens and teens and college students. I mean, it has gone super, super way up over the last generation.
Look at Japan and the work hours. You were talking about, about a month ago, about developing AI so that the workload in Japan could be less, so that it would actually save more people.
But this gets into it. Pain and suffering are relative to the individual.
Which is why the pain and suffering argument ends up being so, like, slippery, right?
Yeah.
It's because, like, you end up in this really weird debate over, like, what pain is justified and what pain isn't.
Yeah.
And it's like, well...
and that begs the question, and back to who controls your life, that begs the question, who really is best qualified to make that decision? Because even physiologic pain is relative. Look at, a rugby player that we all happen to know, who could basically walk around, like the Black Knight in Monty Python. It's a mere flesh wound. And other people, stub their toe and they want you to take it to the ER.
I mean, I know.
Being married to a rugby player, yes.
Yes.
But, so pain is very relative. And who are we on the outside to judge how much that individual is suffering individually?
I mean, all you got to do is look at the health points and the awareness. If the awareness is low and the health points are really up there, then you don't have to worry about anything.
Are they a contributing member to the party, right? Yes. Do I need this person?
Tank. Okay. Before moving on,
or do I have to reload save scum?
So okay, hold on. Yeah. I have bringing a religious aspect into this.
Okay.
We can either transition.
Do a religious aspect.
Okay. If Jesus was Janeway, does Jesus
allow Quinn?
Yes. Because not just the Tuvix conversation. Like at this point, he's a god, and in the sense that the extra normal powers and everything like that. So if Jesus was Janeway, does Jesus allow Quinn to die?
There's a hard thing here because, like, see, my other thing with this is to the nature of the Q themselves, right? Because, like, I actually think death is fundamental to being a living being. Like it's this. In real life, it's this, like, necessary part of existence, this inescapable part of existence. This gets harder with the Q because the whole theory behind them is that they're eternal, undying beings, right? And so my preferred, if we're imagining this is Jesus is the one for whom is making this decision, my storybook ending with Jesus as this is that Jesus just turns Quinn mortal. And he has like a full lifespan, and then he's allowed to naturally die. That's kind of like my, okay, you're going to be turned into whatever age you look like now, and you will
live out the way a humanoid would.
You will live out the way a humanoid would.
So you're pulling up a card?
Well, I'm pulling I was thinking more like this is what happens to the descendants of Elrond and in Lord of the Rings. They get to choose if they're mortal or not.
Yeah.
That's kind of like my kind of solution to that, but that would work. That there's a lot of guesswork going on.
Well, and even more so, to further deepen our ethical quandary here in this discussion, didn't Jesus commit suicide? He set himself up knowing what it would lead to. He did not defend himself in any way.
No, that wouldn't be suicide. Suicide is killing yourself. Allowing yourself to be killed would not be suicide.
Yeah, I would make that right. There's that. There's a difference between being a martyr or however you want to call it.
But even though he set himself up for it, it wasn't like inescapable. He intentionally set himself up for this to happen.
I mean, what's the captain from the Kelvin timeline, Kirk's father, played by Chris Hemsworth, that saves everybody, knowing he has to die.
Yeah, I wouldn't call that suicide. I would make that distinction, I guess the Bible has the New Testament has two things going on that are both working in parallel, so on the one hand, yes, Jesus is very clear. No one takes my life from me. This is not a process that accidentally happens to me. On the other hand, it's also clear that Jesus is willingly entering a well-known mechanism that humans do. I would say it's like as a soldier going into battle with almost certain odds that they're not going to survive a suicide, right? Like
it's not charge of the light brigade, kamikaze fighter,
right? Like it's not not even kamikaze, but if you're going into a near certain defeat in a battle, is that suicide? It's not really, it's willingly entering death, which is a slightly different thing,
Yeah.
So no. going to transition.
Okay.
Because we were talking about in charge of oneself.
Yep.
Data.
Yeah, so this is right. So Data, is Data a living person or not? I think this is a thornier.
Wait, hold on. Living person?
Is he a living
life form?
Is he a sentient?
Is he a sentient life form entitled to Federation rights? You know, which is the premise of.
It's also the premise of the season of Picard.
It's the premise of Picard. There's a next gen episode early. It's one of the good early episodes.
Which I wish they would have brought the JAG officer back.
Yeah, that would have been actually.
He was really good.
Yeah.
It was.
And so there's this trial over, is Data a life form entitled to sentient rights under Federation law? You know, and I actually think that's a thornier ethical issue than
legal.
Well, it is legal, but it's also like, where does that ethical principle end then?
Does the ship's computer also qualify?
Right, exactly. Like the ship's computer is kind of, you know, there are a couple times where it kind of goes pretty close to sentient.
Moriarty.
The sentience, right. The hologram is one giant sentience accident after another.
Yeah.
You know,
no, that's true. And then in Discovery, the ship's computer does fully, completely, totally become sentient.
Right.
Well, I mean, I think you'd have to have a body. Like the point where it would stop would be you have to have a physical body.
Body.
I mean, a ship is not a physical body.
Yeah.
Yes, it is a container that holds.
All right. And
that holds that distinction.
But
yeah.
a physical humanoid body.
Or I'm just throwing this out there. Are we being biased by insisting it has to have a humanoid type form?
No, we are absolutely being biased. That's why it's new life. It's because it is a new form of, like, if you look at all the aliens, they're all humanoid-ish.
There's this great line where the Klingons go, the Federation is just a Homo sapiens only club.
Yeah.
Star Trek 6.
And that,
you know?
But from an ethics standpoint, even that, you look at the Horta, the Medusans, the Organians. I mean, there's so many aliens that are not humanoid. And then there's the infamous Next Gen episode where they find that all the humanoid aliens are really ultimately the seed of this prototype humanoid. And they advance so much that they spread their DNA across all these worlds. Yeah. And that's why so many of the Federation members are humanoid. They're all actually descendants of one humanoid race.
Yeah. That's more evolution.
Yeah.
Things.
I just think it brings up a lot of, like, because Star Trek has a lot of technology which, like, gets really close. You know, like, Data's unique in some ways, but, like, there's a lot of really close technology they have. And it's kind of like, where do
AI now?
AI now.
Put AI in a body, is it a life form?
Or that getting back to Voyager, that village that they create in that one episode, that Irish village that they create. At what point does the simulation of life become life?
Yeah.
you know?
And then get into, like we talked about, a vessel, right? And in some ways, we're just defining what the vessel looks like as the distinction, because Data is in a container that happens to be humanoid. Stretch off Trek for a moment. Look at Doctor Who, the Doctor's wife, when the TARDIS matrix is put into a human body.
What was the episode with the Troy's friend? It was a ship, like it's a body, but it has sentience to it. The Bajoran, right? It has a name too.
Yeah, it does. But I'm thinking, that got me thinking about the very premise when we were starting. And I don't remember if it was when we started this episode or started chatting before the episode, but Andromeda.
Yeah. Yeah. The ship
does have a humanoid.
Ship is sentient. I mean,
is sentient.
It's very clear. It's
got a humanoid avatar that it
has
occupy.
Relationships with people, and it has,
Yeah. So is that ship ethically?
In the Andromeda universe, the answer is clearly yes.
Okay.
They treat it like, every time they happen upon one, they treat them like humans.
Yeah.
You know, like, and they attach the same emotional rate to Andromeda as they do any other member of the crew.
And that bounces us back to Troy's thing. Yeah. Just from another Roddenberry property.
Tin Man? Tin Man, right?
I think it is Tin Man.
Yeah.
But that, I know we don't have a resolution here, but that is a major ethical dilemma. And true to the best of sci-fi, it is one that we are going to be facing in reality very shortly.
Yes.
Combined not just with AI, but the fact that, 2 weeks ago, we actually created totally synthetic human embryo.
Yeah. When is the simulation of life?
Yeah.
You know?
So, they destroyed it because of laws and regulations, but if we let a synthetic embryo actually grow into adulthood, now we're back and we're with the synths.
Yeah.
And do androids dream of electric sheep?
Yeah.
Was it bags of mostly water where it's the
ugly bags of mostly water? It's a great description of human beings.
But we are going to be facing this. So I feel like right now the three of us have to decide.
Okay, we're using this as case law.
Yes, exactly.
Okay. No one has any rights.
Nobody has any right. That's the answer.
But we are. I mean, we are easily within a decade facing this in reality.
Right. I think it's easy to get to the point where simulation is close to the reality. Yeah.
I think we only have one right, and it's to party.
And we have to fight for that right.
Yes.
We have to fight for that right. I am for whatever ethical universe is determined by the Beastie Boys.
Yes.
No sleep till Brooklyn.
Yes.
Skipping to another universe.
Hop skipping?
Yeah, I know. Hop skipping. Should Sarah Connor tell John who his father is a bigger ethical it's just this line she spouts off at the end of the movie, but boy, is there a lot involved in that decision. You either gotta trust that he's gonna make the right decision if you don't tell. There's a lot of trust either way, right?
Yeah.
If you tell him, do you burden him with the knowledge that that's his father and he's sending him back to die, but to also give him life? Or do you not tell him and burden him with the not knowledge, right?
Well, and if you tell him and he messes things up, then you get that time loop thing. If he doesn't send his dad back and his dad dies, then Connor's not going to be born.
Right.
So is he then committing suicide by not sending his dad
and
back?
killing his mother? Because, it's the whole thing is
it's very deep. But that ethical dilemma broadly applies to all time travel stories.
Yes.
Doctor Who gets around it by saying that there are fixed points in space and time that cannot be changed because the general course of the universe has to stay the same.
Yeah, no, it doesn't. It's just, it's a cheap cop out and it's definitely gone back and fixed those fixed points.
But, there are things like even Stephen Fry wrote a great sci-fi novel of killing Hitler. And basically, and this is where the ethics are interesting, the professor that invents it, you can't actually send a person back. You can't go back. Yeah. But you can establish this tiny little portal. Yeah. And so what they do is they send a drop of poison into the drinking water that makes Hitler's mom
die.
Now, she doesn't die. I think it makes her infertile. It's something like that, where just Hitler simply is not born.
Right.
Is what happens with that. But what happens with the dilemma of that, on top of, do you have the right to destroy someone who was alive in the first place? And there were people who were more virulent than Hitler was in their anti-Semitism and their belief in Nazism. Yeah. And so all that happened was this other guy who was in the wings
got more power.
Now he just gets more powerful, and Nazi Germany was even worse and won World War II.
Yeah, right. Yeah, and this is the debate about, we didn't have this on our list, but that original series episode, City on the Edge of Forever.
Yes.
Right?
Yeah.
Where do you save this person who actually creates a worldwide peace movement, but then that destroys civilization?
Yeah. One of Joan Collins' better roles, I would say.
Right. Yeah, it's a great episode.
But that,
Yeah, time dilemmas are often big, thorny ethical issues.
Hugely ethical issues because, again, of the butterfly effect. If you change the smallest event in time, in the past, there are people who will not be born who are alive today. Do you have that right to extinguish their existence?
Besides the very bad things that happened in World War II, think of the advancements of human beings of what happened in the next 20 years after World War II with, going from flying in airplanes to going to the moon.
Yeah.
I mean, if you think about as human beings, how much we evolved technologically from World War II and how much our life expectancy has grown since then. Is it ethical to basically kill all the other people afterwards?
Yeah.
And that is, again, broader ethical dilemma. Many of our biggest medical advances happen as a direct result of war, as a direct result of doctors trying to figure out how to keep people alive when they've been wounded severely. And that has led to huge, huge medical advancements.
Yep.
So how many people were saved because of our violence?
Yeah, at a certain level with some of these things, you just got to be like, Bonhoeffer does this whole thing in his book Ethics on like, this is why you can't get caught thinking in right and wrong as like your standard, because like you get caught trying to determine knowledge you don't actually have, like Bonhoeffer says, anytime we start evaluating things as just right or wrong, we're redoing Adam and Eve's mistake of grabbing the knowledge of the tree of good and evil, because it requires this comprehensive knowledge like we just don't have of what is good and what is evil,
But I think humans cannot have. There's so many variables.
Well, right, and that's his point. Is like the snake's actually lying in the story in Genesis. Oh, you'll be able to know good from evil. It's like, actually, the devil's a liar. like that's actually not true. We get this really incomplete knowledge, that just puts us in this pretty miserable place.
That's just enough to make us judgmental.
Right. It is. It's just enough to make us think we're gods, but we're not actually.
Which gets us to the Star Trek episode, Whom Gods Destroy.
Right. Well,
can we move past Star Trek for a second?
Well, so let's get get to another universe.
Okay.
I've been watching Star Wars Rebels, and I just got through a Saw Gerrera episode. So Saw Gerrera is a living, walking ethical dilemma, right? I mean, and so we'll call it the Saw Gerrera dilemma of how far do you fight? How far do you give in to your worst principles in order to fight evil?
Yeah.
Right.
Is this the one where they burrow down? They're in the tunnels on the...
No, it was the one where
I mean, you can just any time with Saw Gerrera.
Yeah, any time with Saw Gerrera.
Like
this particular one,
Andor, where he's like, oh yeah, those guys are just going off and they're all going to die.
Right.
Yeah.
This one was the one where he gets Ezra Sabine to go with him to find the Kyber crystal.
Yeah.
And like Saw's like, I'm just gonna blow up all these people, and from a certain perspective, like I get Saw's point. You've got to do what you got to do to to win this fight, right? Yeah. Like the Empire's not going to lie down.
I mean, it's the end. Do the ends justify the means?
Yeah, right. And my typical answer to that is no, but like it's hard to tell people in the moment that.
Yeah.
Right. Like,
I mean, wartime versus peacetime is completely different.
Yeah.
And I mean, obviously, Saw Gerrera doesn't have a soul, or he has compromised his soul enough that he just doesn't care.
Yeah.
Stuff like that weighs heavier on some people than others.
Yeah. But like it's believable, especially in that particular episode. It's being painted as like Saw versus Mon Mothma, who seems almost reluctant to do anything, and it's like, well, if those are my choices, sometimes Saw seems better, but it's hard. It's hard to tell the Ezra Bridgers, you got to wait. This isn't the way we do it, and doing it this way won't get us very far.
And that's where it gets hard, right? Even in everyday life, how many times have you made a snap decision that in the moment seemed like absolutely the only course that you really should take, and afterward you regret it?
Yeah. So next on my list is Thanos, and I'm just going to say this. Thanos is dumb.
Oh, yeah, this was supposed to be the opening. I forgot, yeah.
Thanos is an idiot.
Okay, Thanos is an idiot. Next topic.
Yeah. Well, I mean...
All right, well, we need to explain the ethical dilemma for the audience at home. Yeah. Not everybody has seen all the Avengers movies.
In the Avengers movies, Thanos' main thing is that he thinks life is going to spiral out of control with continual growth.
We're talking movie.
Yeah, right. And I'm talking
not comic.
Right, I'm talking movie. Thanos.
That's why I wanted that to say.
Yes.
Yeah.
His solution to this problem is to blink out half of all life in order to create perfect balance, and everybody will be more prosperous. And he kind of goes through this. He's like, "Oh, that world I committed half a genocide on is a paradise now," and
resources,
right, and resources. And I just got to say, this is all based from a philosopher named Malthus. Malthusian logic is just stupid. Like, we have been predicting that we're going to run out of food every decade. What it forgets is that human beings innovate, and living creatures innovate, right? So like
church math,
right? So it's like, we're going to run out of food. Well, it turns out we had the Green Revolution and we invented whole new strains of material to get food. And
when you actually analyze, again, getting back to, we don't think holistically, we have trouble seeing the big picture and all the variables.
Right.
The real issue as far as food resources go
is waste.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
We waste so much. We have more than enough capacity to feed a much bigger population of humans. but we have so much waste in the way that we distribute that food.
And even like resources that aren't great, but like, like oil is a great example. Peak oil was supposed to happen like 20 years ago, but what happened? We invented fracking, and so like the Texas oil industry is booming again. America's now is one of the largest oil producers in the world again, like after we were supposed to hit peak oil.
Yeah.
And don't get me wrong, we should all walk and use electric cars and
ride our bikes.
Yes. And global warming is happening, but that's with a not great resource, and it's just that kind of logic that there will be a shortage, and so we must cull the population or something as
at work we call it's the philosophy of abundance versus the philosophy of scarcity. And we do even on an energy factor, right? We're looking at fossil fuels, which are finite. There's no question.
Right.
Yeah. We are discovering new ways to extract them.
Yeah.
But there's still only so much. We will run out at some point.
Right. But we've got other alternatives.
Right. We have the sun is going to way outlive us, and we haven't even begun to harness its power.
Right.
Same with wind energy. There's so much more we can do with what we are now calling green renewables that can more than adequately replace the fossil fuels. We're just continuing to develop the technology to make it practical. And those kinds of decisions of just saying, energy crisis. Well, that's because you're only looking at fossil fuels.
Yeah.
So look at the bigger picture. And an abundance philosophy makes a lot more sense, as it does if you look back on human history.
Right.
Like you said, we're incredibly innovative where we need to be.
Humans are pretty determined, ever since we decided to crawl out of that cave.
Yeah.
Look on the other side of the horizon.
I think Malthus was just the Eeyore of the philosopher's set.
Yeah. Anyway, Thanos is an idiot. That's my
movie
conclusion
Thanos.
to that.
Movie Thanos.
Because
movie Thanos.
Comic book Thanos, it makes way more sense. Because,
because comic book Thanos sees death as his lover.
Yes.
Right. Yes.
So I got to impress her. I got to kill as many people as possible. She'll love me for that.
Right.
That's way more compelling of a storyline I wish they would have done. But moving on.
All right, another universe. I call this the is Cypher right dilemma, from The Matrix.
Yeah.
So if you remember the first Matrix movie, Cypher betrays, spoiler alert for a movie from 20 years ago.
Over your ears.
You're right. Cypher's working with the agents, right? And he has this dialogue with Trinity where he goes, I think the Matrix is more real, than the real world. And his pitch is that the real world is objectively miserable, right?
And he's not wrong.
Right. Yeah. And he's not wrong, right? Like, especially in their world, it's this post-apocalyptic hellscape. It's objectively miserable, like all these things, right? And so his pitch is it's better to be in the Matrix than to bring people out. And that creates, I think, an interesting ethical dilemma. Like, is it ethical for the human resistance to actually be liberating all these people? Like when in fact it's actually revealed that like a lot of people would prefer to choose to be in the Matrix. What's the ethical decision there? Is it ethical to make them face reality, or is it, do you leave them there?
And that gets to the very nature of what is reality, because we know that no two of us perceive reality the same way.
I don't perceive any reality. I'm going to just make it up as I go along.
Our perception of reality is so subjective, which is why I only dabble in it. It's like, I know it's, it's all subjective. So why bother?
Yeah. I mean, it's a hard, I don't think he's right kind of in the end, but to get there, you've got to say like freedom is worth something. Yeah. Right. Like that the determined, that.
And not everybody believes that, even in what we are now calling reality.
Right.
Not every cultural group on the planet believes that freedom is.
Right. Like I believe it is, but like that's the way you get there, because otherwise if you just evaluate it on like a material status, like, then it doesn't work, but I think both reality and liberty are worth something, but you're right. That's like those are a priori assertions you've got right there. Yeah. Into a universe which the second movie is coming out soon, God bless, Dune and the Golden Path. So if you've not read the Dune books, Paul and his son Leto can see the future. Spoiler alert. But in the story, both Paul and his son see this looming crisis. Like they can see the future like thousands of years into the future, you know, and they see this looming crisis, and there's this problem that humanity faces, which is control and stagnation, basically, is kind of how the book puts it. And so the solution to it in the books is something called the golden path, which is to make humanity so intensely miserable for so long that they refuse to be controlled, sedentary, you know, at all for, you know, and Paul refuses to do it. And his son, this is why he becomes a sandworm and lives for thousands of years, is because he intentionally enforces this autocratic miserableness on humanity in order to force them to never be stagnant or accept domination ever again.
Yeah.
You know, and there's a whole, it's almost the reverse of the time, you know, instead of affecting the past, what do you do in the present because you know what the future is, you know, back to the means and the ends question again.
Which also, again, pulling it back into Star Trek also reflects the whole Pike conundrum.
Which is on the list. Yeah.
So, I don't know.
I don't know either, right? Well,
which is an okay answer.
Yeah, it's an okay answer, right? Like I tend to think I personally would have followed Paul and just walked off into the desert. You know, because that's what Paul does. Paul's solution to this problem is to like just walk off to the desert and become a monk. Like that would have been my answer to the problem, you know. But it's a hard.
And see, the Dune example, the Golden Path, is a much harder one than my normal. My view is, you know, I'm more of an activist. I'm more of if you know a problem is coming,
right,
try to fix it. Don't. You want to reduce suffering, you know.
But if the solution is so much more suffering, you know,
right?
Like
that's where the Dune issue is much more of a quandary,
right? It's like it's thousands of years of suffering, you know, like.
And that in that case. Yeah, I don't know. I don't think I would walk off into the desert and just ignore it.
Right. But I understand Paul's response.
Yeah.
You know, like
Obi-Wan and Anakin. Like Obi-Wan can see what Anakin's becoming and chooses to go off into the desert.
Yeah. I mean, right. You know, is it right for Obi-Wan to ignore Anakin, the whole Anakin Padme thing? It is clear from, like, if you listen to the deleted scenes from Star Wars Episode 3, and if you watch the Clone Wars, that, like, Obi-Wan knows.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah.
And
Ahsoka knows.
And actually, like,
pretty much the galaxy's worst kept secret.
Right. If you had two eyeballs, you should know. Right. Like,
okay, hold on. 3PO wouldn't know, though.
Yeah, well,
I think 3PO wouldn't know.
3PO wouldn't
R2D2 would
right.
definitely know.
R2D2 definitely knows. You know, like everybody knows. And the solution Obi-Wan comes to is to turn away because to kind of like turn a blind eye because it makes his friend happy. Like, this is my friend. I want him to be happy, you know? Okay. And so there's a huge question about, like, is it right for him? You know, the rules are clear, right? You're not supposed to form attachments like this, right?
No passion whatsoever.
No passions, right? Like, and Obi-Wan himself has lived up into that. You know, he's tried to at least.
He's tried to.
Well,
again, if you look at Clone Wars, the whole thing with Mandalore.
Yeah, but he tried, right? He made the effort. Yeah, you know, I'm not saying you have to do it succeed 100% of the time, but Obi-Wan has tried, you know, to live into that rule, right? And it's also very clear that this attachment is actually the driving. This is actually one of the things I thought Episode 3 did well, right? That, like, this attachment is what Palpatine uses to twist Anakin around himself, right? Like, it's this attachment is the very thing that turns him in the end.
Yeah,
you know.
Yes, I can save her.
I can save her. Well, and in Episode 2, this is the only redeeming thing about Episode 2 is Padme has this whole speech about, you know, we'd be basing it all on a lie, and the lie would consume us. Is what she says in the Clone Wars.
That's right.
Right. It's the only good part of it. And then she totally ignores it. But, you know, like.
Yeah. I love I don't know, is it a dichotomy, paradox? I don't know. But the fact that it is ultimately, it is love that turns Anakin evil. It's manipulated by the Emperor, by Palpatine. But if that love wasn't there, he wouldn't have the wedge to create Darth Vader.
Yeah. No, it's the fear. It's not the love.
Right. It's the fear of losing the love.
Yeah.
It's the fear.
And that's
the Yoda point, right?
Yeah.
Fear leads to anger. Anger leads to hate.
Yeah.
Hate leads to suffering.
It's the fear of...
Suffering leads to an ongoing franchise that will last forever.
Right.
Yeah.
Thank you, Filoni. But I mean, that's also the point, because, and that's why I think the Jedi don't have that philosophy, is because when you have fear of loss of attachment, that's when you can make mistakes or choose the dark side. I think they mentioned it about with Ahsoka. There was some time she got kidnapped or something like that, and Anakin's about to get on a Star Destroyer and just go freaking rain down hell. Right. But Obi-Wan's no, you can't. You have to deal with this. You have to be able to detach yourself from the situation.
Right.
So excellent point.
I think there's there's a fascinating alternative universe in Star Wars where Obi-Wan ixnays this whole thing, or at least he challenges it from the very beginning, right? Where he goes yeah, I know you're married and that's bad. You should just leave the order if that's what you want to do, right? Now,
here's a better question, because we touched on this a couple weeks ago, is if Qui-Gon didn't die, would Anakin and Padme ever get together?
I mean, still had his original master. Oh,
yeah. I think I don't know if they would. I think Qui-Gon would have been able to, because Qui-Gon had a much more flexible relationship with the rules. Let's say,
and not just that he had flexible relationship with the rules. He was more of a father figure to Anakin, whereas Obi-Wan was more of a brother figure.
Right.
You were my brother, Anakin.
Yeah, and I tend to think Qui-Gon could have been able to look at him and be both be okay, you can make that mistake, but it's going to be a mistake, kind of thing,
and be able to warn him in very practical terms, not just as generic,
right?
Yeah.
I think Qui-Gon would have been better at it, which is the whole point of the series, right? Yeah. Qui-Gon would have been better at it.
Yeah,
but yeah.
Well, you would have thought that Obi-Wan would have shared a little bit more about his experiences with Satine.
Well, there's a whole thing there.
Yeah.
You would have thought.
But it also wasn't written until the six Rebels.
Yeah.
We're back into that looking into the future.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, there is a whole lesson on Obi-Wan is, for all that he's an awesome guy, he's also kind of a failed teacher, right? It's actually why I didn't object to the new trilogy's thing about Luke being a failed teacher. I'm well, this is kind of a series of stories about failed teachers, right? Obi-Wan was a failed teacher of Anakin. Luke's a failed teacher of Adam Driver's character. They're all kind of it's this series of failed teachers. And the question is, can good overcome
bad teaching,
right? Which the answer is yes.
Wow. Yeah. And here I was buying into all the bunk that it was a Skywalker family story.
No,
it's definitely not.
No.
Yeah,
when you look at it that way.
I mean, it is a Skywalker family story, but it's also a story of
the Skywalkers' bad teachers.
Right. That these Skywalkers keep running into, failed teaching.
What if Duncan Idaho was a really rotten teacher? Yeah, I like that.
Yeah, right. Exactly. What if Duncan and Gurney sucked at teaching? What happens to Paul? So, all right. On that note, we have solved no ethical dilemmas, as we never do.
Whatsoever. You have just wasted nearly an hour of your time.
Right. Wrestling with, but go out and wrestle with some other ethical dilemmas in the name of Church in Space.
In 3D.
See you, folks.
But that was smooth.
We're done. No, that's ends. There's nothing that we can do to add to that. That was just... Whew. We actually transitioned really well, too.
It's we're learning something.
I'm turning that off.